The first 10 seconds after a coworker throws you under the bus decide more about how you're seen at work than the actual mistake will. Most people assume the danger is the lie itself. It usually isn't. The real damage happens after, in a reaction nobody is grading you on, but everyone in the room is quietly reading. Companies don't call it a test. There's no scorecard, no form where someone writes, handled pressure well. But functionally, that's close to what's happening. And the four instinctive reactions that feel completely natural in that moment are usually why the story sticks. I'm Dre. I've spent enough time sitting in manager conversations, performance discussions, and the messy aftermath of workplace conflict to know one thing for certain. Blame rarely gets remembered the way people think it does. Not the way you'd expect, and definitely not the way it feels while you're standing in the middle of it. Here's the thing. You already know what it feels like to get blamed for something that wasn't your fault. That part isn't the mystery. The mystery is what's happening on the other side of the table while it's unfolding. Because managers usually aren't judging the accusation the way you assume they are. Now, here's the part almost nobody realizes. In that moment, most managers can't actually verify who's telling the truth. Not right away. Verifying facts takes time, sometimes days, sometimes a full investigation. But composure? Composure is visible instantly. So functionally, in the first few minutes of a blame situation, a manager isn't grading accuracy. They're grading how you're handling pressure. That's not fair. And I want to be careful here, because it's also not universal. It depends on the manager, the culture, the company. But I've personally seen versions of this play out enough times to tell you it's common, not rare. Let's say two people get accused of the same mistake, side by side, in a meeting or over a quick message thread. One goes quiet and rigid, or fires back hard. The other stays level and asks a clarifying question. Before a single fact gets checked, the manager has already started forming an opinion about who handles conflict well. That opinion sticks, and here's the uncomfortable part. It usually benefits whoever looked calmer, whether or not they were actually right. I know that sounds backwards. It is. I'm not defending it. I'm telling you how it gets read. That's exactly why the first mistake people make is also the most common one, and probably the one you've already made before without realizing what it cost you. Mistake number one is defending yourself loudly, right there in the moment, in front of whoever's watching. I get why. If someone just lied about you in front of your team, staying calm feels like losing, like you're letting the lie stand. But here's the uncomfortable truth. A heated public defense, even a fully justified one, usually reads as emotional internally. And in a lot of workplaces, the loudest reaction in the room becomes the story people repeat later, not the original accusation. Nobody quotes who lied first. They remember there was a whole thing between the two of them, and your name is permanently attached to the whole thing right next to theirs. I'm not saying this is fair. I'm saying this is how it gets read. The person defending themselves publicly can end up looking like part of the conflict instead of the target of it, which is a strange kind of unfair, because you're the one who got lied about. Let's say the accusation happens in a group chat or on a call with other people present. The instant, heated reply, even if every word of it is true, becomes the thing people screenshot in their memory, the tone people bring up later when your name comes up. Meanwhile, the original claim, the one that was actually false, fades into the background because it wasn't delivered with the same intensity. To be clear, calm correction is different from silence, and tone matters, and culture matters, and some workplaces genuinely reward directness. But loud, public self-defense in the actual moment of the accusation is rarely the win people think it is. So if defending yourself loudly backfires, does that mean you just sit there and take it? No. And that's mistake number 2. Mistake 2 is escalating straight to the manager, but doing it emotionally, without framing it first. Here's what people don't realize. Managers mentally sort incoming complaints into 2 buckets almost instantly: informational or emotional. And that sorting happens in the first sentence you say, sometimes even in your tone before the words register. Walk in upset, vague, and worked up, and you often get filed as a personality conflict to be managed, not a facts issue to be resolved. Let's say 2 people report the exact same incident, separately to the same manager. One is specific. Here's what happened, here's the timestamp, here's who else saw it. The other is visibly upset, jumps around, and is hard to follow. In systems I've worked with, those 2 reports get handled completely differently, even though the underlying event is identical. The specific one usually gets looked into. The emotional one often gets quietly filed as difficult, and the actual wrongdoing gets buried under the delivery. I know there's a double standard here, and I want to name it directly. Managers get to be short with people. Companies get to sit on decisions for weeks. Nobody holds leadership to the same standard of calm, specific communication they expect from you. That's real, and it's frustrating. But I'm telling you how the receiving side reads it, not how it should work. Knowing the double standard exists doesn't cancel out how the system responds to you inside it. Now here's the part almost nobody thinks about: the audience you didn't mean to build. Mistake 3 is venting to other coworkers, trying to build support before you go anywhere official. It feels protective. Rallying people around your version feels like insurance, like proof that you're not making it up. But most workplaces run on something I'd call a whisper network, an informal channel of who's saying what to whom, completely separate from anything official. And managers usually hear a filtered version of it eventually, whether you wanted them to or not. By the time it reaches the manager, it rarely sounds like, "This person got wrongly blamed." It usually sounds like, "There's tension on the team," or "People have been talking." And once a manager hears that phrase, they tend to distance themselves from the whole situation instead of sorting out who was actually at fault. Because managing tension feels safer than assigning blame. I've seen versions where the person who was actually wronged ends up lumped into team drama, treated the same as the person who caused the problem in the first place. That's not justice. It's just how internal narratives tend to compress once enough people are repeating their own version of them. And if talking too much backfires, you think silence is the safe option. It's actually the most dangerous one. Mistake 4 is going silent and letting it pass entirely. This one is sneaky because it feels professional, mature even, like you're rising above it. But here's the functional truth. An unaddressed narrative doesn't disappear on its own. It usually keeps getting repeated, uncontested, by the person who told it first, because nobody's correcting it. And in the absence of a competing account, the first story told is often the one that becomes the default memory, sometimes weeks later, long after anyone remembers the actual details of what happened. Guess what version ends up in someone's head when only one account of an incident was ever spoken out loud? It's not neutral. It's whoever spoke first, confidently, and never got challenged. Staying silent can quietly cost you credibility with zero visible conflict at all. You may never even know it happened because nobody's going to call you and tell you your reputation shifted. It just quietly does. I want to be careful here too, because silence in the short term, right in the heat of the moment, isn't automatically the wrong move. Permanent silence, the kind where you never circle back at all, usually is. So if none of the four instinctive reactions actually work, what does? Before I get there, I want to slow down on something important, because I don't want you leaving this video thinking every blame incident follows you forever. It doesn't, and this next part matters. One incident, even handled badly, is usually recoverable. This doesn't prove anything by itself, but it's worth paying attention to. A single rough afternoon rarely defines how someone sees you long term. What actually causes lasting damage is a pattern, the same reactions compounding across multiple incidents, not one bad moment under pressure. If this is the first time this has happened to you, you're probably fine. If this keeps happening and you keep reacting the same way each time, that's the version that starts to stick. Now, how would you even know if a pattern is actually forming instead of just one bad week? I want to be careful here because you can't see internal notes or private conversations, and I can't tell you with certainty what's happening behind a closed door. But there are signals, and they're worth watching. A manager who used to loop you into decisions suddenly stops. You get left off a project you would have normally been included in with no explanation given. People who used to check in with you directly start going around you instead. You ask a direct question about your standing and get a vague, careful answer instead of a real one. None of these prove anything on their own. This doesn't prove anything, but it may be a signal, especially if you're seeing 2 or 3 of them stack up at once, right after a blame incident rather than randomly scattered across the year. One rejection, one cold interaction, one awkward meeting means very little by itself. A repeated pattern, clustered around the same period, is what actually matters. Here's where it actually gets useful. What works isn't dramatic, and it has nothing to do with winning the moment in front of an audience. It's calm, factual, timely communication directly with the person involved or the manager, specific instead of emotional. Not, they're always doing this to me. More like, here's exactly what happened, here's when, and here's what I can show you if you need it. That single shift in framing changes which bucket you land in. Functionally, building a normal habit of documenting your own work quietly as routine rather than as defense protects you without ever needing to accuse anyone of anything. You're not building a case against a coworker. You're building a record that simply exists whether or not this situation ever comes up again, whether or not anyone ever asked for it. Address it once, directly and professionally, not repeatedly, not publicly. Don't build a coalition. Build a factual record instead, because a coalition creates a whisper network story about tension that reflects on everyone, while a factual record creates something a manager can actually verify without having to guess who's telling the truth. If you do decide to loop in your manager, do it once, with specifics, and let it be the end of the conversation rather than the opening of an ongoing campaign. Repeating your side of it every week doesn't reinforce your credibility. Past a certain point, it starts to work against you the same way the original loud defense did, because now you're the one bringing it up. I know this sounds almost too simple compared to how dramatic the moment feels when you're standing in it, but I've personally seen versions of this play out over and over in different teams, different companies, different personalities, and the pattern holds up. The people who come out of these situations fine are rarely the loudest in the room, and they're rarely the quietest either. They're usually the calmest, the most specific, and the ones who let facts do the talking instead of emotion. So let's bring this back around to where we started. Yes, coworkers throwing people under the bus is real. It happens more often than anyone wants to admit. It isn't always caught, and it isn't always fair. But the damage that follows you afterward usually isn't caused by the lie itself. It's caused by which of these four instinctive reactions you default to in the 10 seconds right after it happens. You can't stop someone from blaming you. You never really could, and no amount of preparation changes that. But you can control whether your reaction becomes the story people remember instead of theirs. Stay calm, stay specific, document quietly, and address it once instead of a dozen times in a dozen different rooms to a dozen different people. That's the part that's actually inside your control. And in most situations like this, it's the only part that ever really was.